Winchester Model 1897 shotgun is a historically important and also very cool shotgun in its own right. However, the 1897 military configuration, known as the trench gun, ranks amongst the most sought-after and prized pieces of American military surplus. As such, these guns are regularly faked, and if you are set on collecting an authentic piece, you absolutely must do a lot of research in advance. While there are certainly very well done fake guns out there, most of the alleged trench guns you will find on the market are pretty easy to evaluate if you know a few key things to look for. Additionally, some guns may be partially correct, but have certain components that have been inaccurately replaced over the intervening decades. Unfortunately, legitimate and complete examples of 1897 trench guns are rather rare in comparison to the much more numerous homages, copies, and clones. This video will review some of the more obvious things to look for when evaluating an alleged trench gun, but it will not be an exhaustive, detailed list. The viewer is encouraged to do their own research in addition to the points shown in this video. The authoritative sources that are highly recommended for aspiring trench gun collectors are Bruce Canfield's book, Complete Guide to United States Military Combat Shotguns, and Joe Poyer's book, U.S. Winchester Trench Gun and Riot Guns and Other U.S. Combat Shotguns. For an example, we will be reviewing a World War I era Winchester 1897 trench gun. I purchased this gun over a decade ago, and it clearly fell into the category of legitimate trench gun that had been illegitimately modified over the years. With lots of time and patience, I was able to eventually replace the incorrect parts with originals, and finally have the gun restored to as close to an original condition as possible. We will first look at common features that are unique to 1897 trench guns of any vintage, and then focus on features specific to the World War I variant of 1897, as opposed to the later variants from World War II and beyond. Of course, these factors only apply to Model 1897 Winchester trench guns. They do not apply to Model 12 trench guns, Remington Model 10 trench guns, Stevens or Ithaca Model trench guns, or any other type of combat shotgun. For a much more detailed history of the 1897 trench gun, I encourage you to go and watch the video from my friends over at CN Arsenal. And while you're there, watch everything else they do too. It's pretty great. The most important and clear-cut way to determine if a shotgun was produced for military use is by checking the serial number. 1897 trench guns purchased by the U.S. government during World War I will fall roughly between the serial numbers of 613,000 to 705,000, depending on the reference material. World War II guns may fall between about 921,300 and 986,300. In both cases, they will have a letter E prefix and be stamped above the loading port on the bottom of the receiver, with correctly matched World War II variants being additionally stamped on the receiver extension. It is important to note, however, that not all guns within these ranges were necessarily trench guns. Many guns in the riot configuration were also purchased by the government, so additional factors must also be checked. The barrels of trench guns were all 20 inches long, and though there is some minor variability, they should typically extend past the bayonet adapter clamp to approximately the front of the bayonet lug. Barrels showing anything less than a clean perpendicular cut across the muzzle are likely longer-barreled guns that have been sawed off, and are therefore not original. Riot guns also had 20-inch barrels. The tube magazine on most 1897 shotguns, including riot guns, is typically held to the barrel near the front with the use of a barrel band. This necessitated the milling of a small notch under the barrel for the screw to ride in. Trench guns had a magazine attached directly to the bayonet adapter via a plug set in the end of the magazine tube. They did not utilize a barrel band at all. Many homemade trench guns can be easily spotted by the presence of a barrel band under the heat shield, or more subtly by the cut where one would be placed. This gun has no evidence of previously having had a barrel band. All trench guns should be marked as being cylinder bore by way of a CYL on the left side of the barrel just in front of the receiver. Any other marking in this location, such as full, indicates that the gun, or at least the barrel, began its life as a longer commercially choked gun that was later cut down. Again, riot guns will also be cylinder bored. The 1897 shotgun used a brass bead as its front sight during the World War I era, and a German silver bead during World War II. Just like longer commercial guns, riot guns had this bead set directly into the muzzle end of the barrel. Due to the addition of the bayonet adapter, the trench configuration placed the bead on the end of the bayonet adapter itself. In World War I guns, there should be no bead, hole for a bead, or filled-in hole for a bead at the muzzle of an authentic trench gun barrel. Some World War II guns may have a filled hole, but require a detailed analysis to determine authenticity. Of course, a cut-down longer barrel will not have a bead either, so other factors must also be reviewed. The bayonet adapter, or more specifically the heat shield, was a weak point in the design, with a higher percentage of these parts being damaged or lost than the guns themselves. This means that even original trench guns may often have aftermarket bayonet adapters and heat shields. All 1897 trench guns were equipped with the W-type bayonet adapter, which sits flush against the magazine and has a characteristic curve as shown here. They will be clamped to the barrel via 3 screws that ride in grooves milled into the bottom of the barrel. There are several other identifying features of these, but I will cover how they differ between variants later. This part had been lost on my gun and replaced with a functional but obviously incorrect part as shown here. Finding an original piece ultimately took over a decade of patience, and it was not inexpensive either. Model 1897 trench guns all include black plastic butt pads with a largely checkered surface and stylized Winchester logo. Trench guns with metal butt pads, or that are inletted for a metal butt pad along the top or bottom, are not in original condition. The buttstocks of all 1897 trench guns also had simple factory inletted lower sling attachment loops. Any other design of lower sling swivel is incorrect, as is the lack of one. The upper sling point is mounted through the bayonet adapter. All World War I and World War II guns were originally finished with Winchester's commercial factory bluing. I am told by some museum historians that during World War I this would have likely been a rust blue type of process. Only a portion of the guns still in service after World War II were put through an arsenal overhaul process that included Parkerization. Canfield states that the number of 1897s that underwent this process was likely rather low. Regardless, for a Parkerized 1897 trench gun to be considered a legitimate arsenal refinish, there should be an arsenal cartouche stamped on the side of the buttstock indicating it as such. In the case of my gun, it had been mostly Parkerized at some point in the past, and while the finish looked old and well worn, the gun lacked the proper arsenal marks, and the magazine tube had been left untouched. As the gun had already lost a significant portion of its value to the first refinishing, once I restored the gun to all original parts, I then opted to have the Parkerization carefully removed and the gun rust blued to match the original pattern. The results were quite nice. Gunsmithing details for this project are in the description. Up to this point, these features have been more or less common to all 1897 trench guns, and their discussion is primarily intended to help weed out fake guns built out of longer commercial guns or riot guns. The following features should also be considered when trying to identify if a gun is real or fake, but they can also be used to identify which variant of 1897 trench gun you are looking at, as well as if the parts are correct to that type. An arsenal replaced part may explain some discrepancies, but should not be considered a reliable excuse on its own. One of the most obvious differences between variants is that World War I guns were all solid frames, while World War II guns all used a takedown style of frame. Never mind that the bayonet attachment itself disallows one to take apart the gun at all. World War I guns will not include the receiver extensions that are present on the World War II models, nor the magazine tube cross-pin of commercial and takedown riot guns. These magazine tubes should have a single hole all the way across to allow a single screw to secure the mag tube plug in place. Winchester began dating 1897 barrels on the underside and near the receiver around serial number 915,000. This means that World War I vintage guns should not have a date stamped under the barrel in this location, while World War II guns likely will. The action slide bar should include this text on World War I guns. Per Poyer, World War II guns above roughly serial number 915,000 typically have blank action slide bars. World War I guns should bear standard Winchester 1897 barrel markings for the time, including text along the left side of the barrel regarding patent dates, gauge, and bore, and a Winchester proof mark on the top. The right side of the barrel should be blank. World War II era guns include various text on both sides of the barrel and will often have a U.S. Ordnance flaming bomb stamped above the receiver on the top of the barrel near the proof mark. Early World War I bayonet adapters will have this specific abbreviation for Patent Applied For stamped on the right side of the bayonet adapter in front of the magazine. Later during World War I, these were replaced with the granted patent dates listed on the left side of the barrel clamp portion. World War II bayonet adapters are typically unmarked or may bear a single W stamp, though earlier World War II guns still used some of the leftover World War I components. The World War I era heat shield included 6 staggered rows of 29 holes each, with 2 holes actually serving as support indentations. Once production got up to speed on the World War II pattern components, the heat shields were reduced to a simpler 4-row by 19-hole design. The heat shield had to be securely fastened to the bayonet lug. While some fake trench guns have these soldered or welded in place, the originals used rivets. The World War I pattern used 6 rivets in sets of 2 that were then ground down smooth prior to finishing the gun. World War II guns were less refined, using only 4 rivets and not including as high a level of polishing and finishing. Stocks on trench guns were always a plain pistol grip shotgun style made out of walnut. They were not checkered. Poyer indicates most trench gun stocks to have been varnished originally. The World War I guns included a thinner wrist and a higher and thinner comb. World War II guns are a bit more stout in the wrist and sport a lower comb with relief cuts here. Often 1897s will develop small cracks in the wrist, especially on the earlier thinner stocks. I had these fixed before they could become worse alongside the rest of the bluing restoration, which resulted in the general cleaning up and refinishing of the wood. World War II guns have US neatly stamped on the left side of the receiver. This is almost always accompanied by a neat flaming bomb ordnance stamp. Many, if not most, World War I guns are actually unstamped with military markings. These are still known to be military arms due to falling within the serial number range block previously identified, but the prevailing theory is that these were not stamped with U.S. property marks until they were being readied for shipment to Europe. With the sudden end of the war in 1918, the marking and issuing of these guns ceased, thus leaving a minority of the World War I guns with martial markings. For those guns that are marked, including this example, the marking should be an uneven U and S over a flaming bomb positioned in front of the ejection port on the right side of the receiver, as shown here. The uneven nature of the markings is due to them all being stamped by hand and without significant care. The 1897 trench gun was designed for use with the M1917 bayonet, as was being issued for the model 1917 Enfield rifle. They sport a blade that is a little over 17 inches long, and due to the finishing process they were only blued a short way up the blade from the hilt. This particular bayonet is a Type 1 produced by Winchester, as denoted by the encircled W on the left side under the 1917 model designation. The right side bears military markings of US, a flaming bomb, and an eagle's head, as well as an X that may have been marked for usage in flex testing the blade. The scabbard is similarly of a Type 1 pattern, with green painted leather and a wire clip for attaching to a leather frog that I do not have. Inspector markings can be found on the backside here. The manual of arms for the 1897 trench gun is virtually identical to any other Winchester 1897 shotgun. The slide must be pressed forward slightly before being pumped to the rear, this being a safety mechanism to allow the gun to naturally unlock under recoil, but to delay manually opening the gun in case of a hang fire. When pumping back, be sure to keep your hand clear of the exposed hammer and bolt. One shell can be loaded through the port and chambered by closing the action. Additional rounds are then loaded into the tube from the bottom of the gun, a common feature now but still fairly new to the realm of shotguns in the 1890s. The only safety on the gun is the half-cock notch for the hammer. When the gun is loaded, this should be set very carefully whilst pointing the gun safely downrange, and even then, fully trusting it is not recommended. When half-cocked, the action is locked and the trigger blocked. But again, it is not recommended to test this over a live round, as depending on the condition of your gun, you could discover where the phrase, "don't go off half-cocked," comes from. If the gun needs to be opened while the hammer is cocked, this button on the right side of the receiver can be used to unlock the action and cycle the gun. There are an additional 2 buttons near the loading port that when pressed together allow for the rapid unloading of the entire magazine. Finally, 1897 trench guns are well known for their lack of a trigger disconnector, which allows for a technique known as slam fire. The operator can hold down the trigger and pump forward on the action, causing the gun to automatically fire once the breech closes and locks. Whether this was historically viewed as a bug or a feature probably depends on the specific user and use case. But as this is an otherwise very mechanically sound and original gun, I will not be subjecting it to the additional wear of slam fire. There are plenty of other videos out there to demonstrate that. Anyway, now on to the shooting.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be proud her boys in line. Over there, over there. Send the word, over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drum jumping everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word, don't beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. Over there, over there. Send the word, over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drum jumping everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word, don't beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Johnny, show the hood, you're a son of a gun. Hoist the flag and let her fly, like two heroes do or die. Pack your little kit, show your grit, do your bit. Soldiers to the ranks from the towns and the towns. Make your mama proud of you, and to liberty be true. Over there, send the word, over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drum thumping everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word, don't beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. We'll be